Well, thank you, Johnny Morris, and hi, everybody. Dr. Bill Thornton with you on the radio on the Natural Health Report. It's from California to the Carolinas and around the world on the NHC Radio Network. Got a question for you. How accurate is the AIDS test? Good question, right? We're going to find out. We'll explore this issue today with a special guest who says the HIV/AIDS test might be flawed, in fact, might even be useless in some respects. The blood test used to determine HIV status, could it be wrong? Could it be flawed? Well, according to my guest this morning, we have a little bit of controversy there. Mr. Stephen Davis is a former Arizona State Senator. He's also a former physician's assistant, so he has a good background in medicine. And he's also a founding member of Up With People. You may remember that group. They've been around for a long time. And he spent about the last 10 years researching the AIDS-HIV connection and has recently published a book. It's called Wrongful Death, the AIDS Trial. And he's got a website out, www.theaidstrial.com. So theaidstrial.com. I'm pleased to welcome to the show Mr. Stephen Davis.
Thank you very much for this opportunity.
My pleasure, and it's great that you're doing this work, Mr. Davis. We've looked at this issue before about a year ago on the program when we talked to a young lady named Kim Bannon who had received an HIV-positive status, never became sick, and went into quite a tailspin in her life because of the results of having this stigma, really, of an HIV-positive status. And she did a lot of research, which came to my attention as well, that perhaps there's something wrong with these tests. Now, from your point of view, I've read your website, and it's really an excellent website. We're going to be directing people there shortly. But, Mr. Davis, tell us how you got involved with this whole idea that the HIV tests are flawed.
As a result of doing the research to write my book, which deals with a fictitious lawsuit about HIV and AZT, the drug that was being given to people who were diagnosed HIV positive in the 80s and 90s. That drug was an extremely lethal chemotherapy that literally, Dr. Bill, caused AIDS and killed 300,000 Americans between 1987 and 1997. And my book, Wrongful Death, is a fictitious account of what would happen if we took those people to trial who told us that HIV caused AIDS and who gave people this lethal drug called AZT. In the process of doing that, the question came up, well, what about these blood tests? And I did not focus on them in that particular book, so I'm writing another one now called A Death Sentence. And there is another website, adeathsentence.com, which deals with these particular HIV blood tests and the flaws that are involved in them. For example, Dr. Bill, many people call these the AIDS test. Well, frankly, this test does not test for AIDS at all.
You're talking about the ELISA test and the Western blot?
Exactly. Those tests are designed to find the antibodies to HIV.
Right.
Now, normally, when someone has antibodies to something, they are immune from that disease. That's what the whole vaccination program is based on, the theory that it works on, and that is you give somebody a little bit of a disease and their immune system figures out how to fight it and defeat it, and when that's happened, they build antibodies to that disease so that they can fight it better in the future. And when someone has those antibodies, we tell them they're immune from that particular disease. But now, in this case, we're telling people you're HIV positive. In other words, you have the antibodies to HIV, but we're sorry to say you're going to get this lethal disease called AIDS. That doesn't make any sense right off the bat.
Now, also, I understand, besides this issue about antibodies and immunity, the HIV test, or the ELISA test, is actually sensitive to a number of proteins in the body.
I have studies here on my desk, Dr. Bill, over 50 studies that find 70 other factors in the human body which will cause a false positive on an HIV blood test. These things, they're as simple as having had a flu shot before you take the test, being pregnant, drinking too much unpasteurized cow's milk, generalized warts, having had hepatitis in the past. In other words, when we're telling people they're HIV positive because they react on one of these tests, we don't know that for sure at all, because they may have had something that is reacting as a false positive, is causing a positive reaction, doesn't have anything to do with HIV at all.
This is unbelievable.
And this is very serious because as soon as somebody's told they're HIV positive, we're giving them a death sentence. As you talked about Kim Bannon last year, well, let me read to you very quickly from the website of the Los Angeles County Department of Health Services. It says, what are the risks of testing for HIV? Now, please understand that doesn't say what are the risks of being HIV positive. It says, what are the risks for testing for HIV? They list two of them. Number one, taking the HIV antibody test is a stressful event regardless of the results. And number two, disclosures of an antibody test result, or sometimes the disclosure that a person even took the test, may lead to discrimination, denial of health coverage, stigmatization, and violence. In other words, Dr. Bill, it's dangerous just to take this thing.
Well, Mr. Davis, when we come back from our first break, we're going to talk more about this issue, and let's talk about how this test is actually interpreted, because where you live could also have an effect on how the test is actually interpreted. We'll be back with our guest, Mr. Stephen Davis, as we continue our discussion about the AIDS test and its possible flaws. Stay tuned. We're talking about the AIDS test this morning. The test itself, which is a blood test called the ELISA test, actually is sensitive to a number of different proteins in our body. It simply means that if you take this test and if you've had, let's say, pregnancy or you've had a flu shot, you could actually test positive for HIV. Now, Mr. Davis, it depends on where you live how this test is interpreted. Can you explain that to us?
Well, it's very easy, Dr. Bill. If someone who's listening to you right now goes and gets an HIV blood test today, and let's say they tested HIV positive, they could fly across the country tomorrow and be tested again using a different test, a different laboratory, and a different set of rules, and be found not to be HIV positive. In fact, there are 10 different ways of judging the results of an HIV blood test depending where you are on the country, what lab you're using, and what criteria that you're using. This is ridiculous. There is, in other words, no standard worldwide or even in the United States to say whether someone is HIV positive or not based on the results of these tests. It's ludicrous. And the thing that bothers me so much is that we're giving people a death sentence. We're causing them tremendous emotional and psychological trauma and family stress and social rejection and financial hardship based on blood tests that are so bad that it's a crime.
So we actually have someone who is, let's say the person is a drug addict, and he tests positive HIV. And then we get the soccer mom coming in from uptown who tests positive as well. In the same clinic, I understand they could get two different interpretations.
Yes, because the other amazing thing about this is that it's done based on profiling. When someone who meets the criteria of being what was called a high-risk group, and that is your drug addicts, your IV drug users, drug-using homosexuals, when they test positive, there's no question they'll be told they're HIV positive. But if the white soccer mom comes in and she tests HIV positive, they're going to say, oh, no, well, it doesn't really count for you because you're not in the high-risk group for AIDS. I mean, this is discriminatory. I mean, we need to be filing some lawsuits, to be very honest with you, Dr. Bill, based on the fact that these HIV blood tests use profiling, and they do discriminate, and they do cause emotional and psychological trauma to a large number of people. See, here are the numbers. You mentioned the fact that the first test anybody's going to take is called an ELISA. Of the 100 people that test positive on an ELISA the very first time, 50 of them are going to test negative on their second ELISA. In other words, right off the bat, we have a 50% false positive reading on the ELISA. If those 50 who test positive again take a Western blot, only 40% of them are going to test positive. So bottom line, out of 100 people who test positive on an ELISA, only 20 of them will turn out to be HIV positive when the testing is all said and done. In the meantime, we've ruined the lives of those other 80 people. So people who are listening to you this morning, if they have been tested HIV positive or they know someone who's been tested HIV positive, I want them to go to a website called adeathsentence.com, and there are 66 studies, scientific medical studies on there, most of them very easy to read, about all the things that are wrong with these blood tests, because I do not want people to to believe they're going to die just because they've been told they're HIV positive, because there's a big chance they're not.
Can you give us that website again, Stephen?
It's www.adeathsentence.com.
Now, I've looked over that website. I want to encourage our listeners to go there. If you're a skeptic, if you're a believer, doesn't make any difference. Take a look at Mr. Davis's website. I looked at the extensive list of references on the bottom of that particular page, Stephen, and I am really impressed about the material you've put together there. I want to stress that the information Stephen is giving us this morning is not just his opinion.
Absolutely right.
Plenty of other people that believe this.
Dr. Bill, I am only one, for example, of over 2,300 of the world's leading medical and scientific researchers, doctors, scientists, journalists, who belong to a group that all of whom agree that HIV does not cause AIDS. Now, this group includes Nobel Prize winners and members of the U.S. National Academy of Sciences. This is a very prestigious group. I'm the very junior member of it, as a matter of fact. But I'm not sitting here out in left field talking conspiracy theory to you today. I am talking real science backed up by over 1,000 medical studies, scientific reports, journals, so forth and so on. So nobody should have to believe anything I say. They can research it for themselves, and when they do, they're going to find out that these HIV blood tests are, in legal terms, arbitrary and capricious. In other words, they do not mean anything, and they can't mean anything. And beyond that, when we get to the real core of the issue, even if someone is truly HIV positive, it is no more dangerous than having brown hair and green eyes, because HIV does not cause AIDS, and that is proven as well.
Fascinating. We're going to come back from a break in just a moment, Stephen. We'll have some time to wrap up our program today. Not enough time to cover this subject in any depth, but we want to get people interested and aware and direct them to your website for more information. So stay with us, folks. We'll be right back with more with Stephen Davis on the Natural Health Report. We're in the midst of a conversation, very controversial subject, HIV and AIDS, the blood tests. We found out from Mr. Stephen Davis that these tests are capricious. They are actually flawed, and if that's putting it mildly, of course. Once somebody's HIV positive, how they are going to be treated is given AZT and other drugs which could actually continue to decrease their immune system, maybe even a death sentence. Now, Stephen is a former state senator from Arizona, a former physician assistant. He's on the line with us from Arizona this morning. And, Stephen, what actually is causing HIV or AIDS in your estimation?
Well, that's an interesting question, Dr. Bill, because many people, thanks to the media, do equate HIV and AIDS, and they are very different things. AIDS is a set of diseases, what are called opportunistic diseases, that result from someone's immune system being very severely compromised, no longer works. HIV is supposed to be the virus that causes that immune system to be dysfunctional. HIV itself is called a retrovirus. It's a very special kind of virus, and even the doctor who discovered it, Dr. Luc Montagnier in Paris, France in 1983, even Dr. Montagnier says that HIV cannot cause AIDS because, very frankly, Dr. Bill, although we know a lot about these retroviruses, not one of them has ever been found to cause harm to a human being. And we're saying this particular one is killing thousands and thousands of white blood cells and destroying our immune system. It doesn't add up. As a matter of fact, HIV fails every single medical test to be called the cause of AIDS. But unfortunately, this has become a multi-billion-dollar business around the world. And you know what happens when money gets involved.
Oh, yeah. Well, I understand the AIDS virus itself never really has been isolated. Although Montagnier...
It has never been isolated. It has never been proven to cause AIDS, and we think that there is substantial proof that it cannot cause AIDS. Here's one quick example. One of the tests that any germ must pass to be called the cause of a disease is that it must be found in every case of the disease. In other words, if I brought you a tuberculosis patient, you would have to find the tuberculosis bacteria in that patient. Doesn't that make sense?
It does.
But in AIDS, we have thousands of cases where there's no HIV and no HIV antibodies. Now, this doesn't, you'd laugh me out of your office if I came in and said, I have a tuberculosis patient, but he doesn't have the tuberculosis bacteria. But instead, with AIDS, we say, oh, that's okay. Well, it's not okay. HIV cannot cause AIDS. And so it makes these HIV blood tests even worse because now we're telling patients they have this supposedly deadly virus, and now they're going to get this deadly disease called AIDS, when in fact the blood test really does not show that, and HIV doesn't do that. And yet the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, want to start testing everyone in this country for HIV.
That's another show, Doc, and we have to make a quick beeline for the door. We're out of time. Mr. Stephen Davis, give us the website one more time, please.
www.theaidstrial.com.